Hello and welcome to Pensions Management Online. Commercial property has been a primary asset for SIPPs and SASs since these structures were created more than 2 decades ago. Property, like all markets, has suffered since 2008, yet it would seem to offer opportunities for those who have the capital to put to work. One trend apparent in Pensions Management's 2010 SIPP survey was that a number of providers were seeing increased demand from their clients for commercial property investment. But where do we find ourselves today? Joining me to discuss commercial property is Martin Tilley from SIPP specialist Dentons. Hello Martin.
Hello Padraig.
So are we seeing increased interest in commercial property?
We have done. You rightly point out that 2008 saw a dry up in the monetary supply. Lenders stopped lending and there was a fall in the value of the market. Nobody wants to invest in a falling market, but as SIPP lending, which is lowly geared, enabled lenders to come back into the market, it's stabilised and interest has certainly increased from the middle of 2009 onwards.
So was there any impact from the anti-forestalling rules that the previous government brought in to prevent or reduce the amount that people could borrow against their SIPPs?
Well yes, the reduction in borrowing and also the anti-forestalling was a double-edged sword in that we couldn't borrow as much as we previously could and we couldn't contribute for the high earners as much as we could. The new annual allowance of £50,000 to some extent addresses that, in that monies can now be pumped into these SIPPs at a greater rate, and it opens up the scope for larger commercial investment.
So we're talking joint purchases there. How much more complicated are joint purchases, and do they become more difficult when borrowing becomes involved?
Joint property purchases need not be that complicated. You are, after all, simply buying a single asset which is held to the order of a number of parties. Joint property purchases can be between a number of SIPPs, between SIPPs and the member, between SIPPs and either connected or unconnected companies. Where borrowing is involved, the lender does need to be on board because they've got to understand they can only take a charge over the proceeds of sale of the proportion of the property on which they've lent, so we can have no cross-subsidies or no cross-lending.
What other areas do potential investors need to be aware of?
Well, the most important thing to bear in mind is timescales, because any property that's going to be funded by a transfer is going to be caught by the statutory cooling off notice on transfers, which means that we can't invest in illiquid assets within 30 days of the transfer request coming ahead. We've also got to bear in mind that if VAT is being applied for, we've got to do that well in advance of the exchange date, and the VAT office can quite often take a while to come back to you. We've also got to bear in mind the solicitors will have to go through the usual searches, make sure the asbestos reports are in place, EPCs, environmental surveys, those sorts of things.
What about other charges, such as ongoing property management?
Well, at Dentons we believe that the client should be able to control those charges and therefore appoint their own providers and negotiate their own costs for doing so. Where property management is simple, for example if the property is leased back to the member's own business, he doesn't need a third party telling him when he should be paying the rent and when he's got to insure the building. So if all of those aspects are being covered, perhaps by the individual member or by his advisors, we don't insist on a property manager being in place. In terms of our own costs, we believe that these should be on a time-costed basis, so the individual client will pay exactly for the time that's taken in settling their own account. Simple property purchases, for example, shouldn't cross-subsidise the more expensive.
So do you anticipate increased demand for commercial property over the coming year then?
Yes, we do. As the market stabilises and as more monetary lending becomes available, we believe this will be a market that will increase. We've already seen quite recently an increase in the proportion of new clients coming towards us who are looking to invest either directly into commercial property or into collectives.
Martin Tilley, thank you very much.
Thank you.